Hi boys and girls, Mr. Bowlby here. I'm excited to show you a few important things that are going to help lead us to our very first painting project. Very important that before we do that, we learn a little bit about this wonderful tool that we will use often in the art room called a paintbrush. I know that you knew that was the name, but I'm wondering if you know the various parts of a paintbrush. Back here, the part that we hold is called the handle. In every great brush, there is a metal portion attached to the handle that holds the end that we'll talk about in a moment. This metal part, though, is called the ferrule. This particular brush shows us a perfect spot with this little gripper where we always hold the brush, which is just behind the ferrule. And I mentioned this little end piece, the portion of the brush that does the work for us is called the bristles. So one more time, if you could say with me, the handle, the ferrule, and the bristles here at the end. Bristles. I wanted to take some time to show you a few different brushes. This particular green one will probably be one of your favorites that we use in this classroom. It's one that I get out often for our painting projects, and it is a small, round brush. You see how that's sort of rounded at the end? Very similar to this brush. Again, you see now that all great brushes have that handle, ferrule, and bristles. This, as I mentioned, is a large round brush, the end of this brush being rounded as well. Also, artists are always aware of the flat brush, where the bristles are no longer rounded, but sort of squared off at the end. This gives us some different shapes. And then two more. This is called a watercolor brush. The bristles on a watercolor brush are always so soft, and you'll see why in a moment. But we don't use these brushes too often. They are specific to a paint that we're going to meet here in a moment. And the last one, I don't know if you can see this, but this guy is for some detail work. If we were writing something very small, we would get out this tiny little brush. And once again, I want to point out that all great brushes have that handle, ferrule, and the tip called the bristles at the end there. So now that I've shown you some great brushes that we will use in this classroom, I want to show you some different paints. And there are three great paints that we are going to use this school year. The first one over here, I've got two for you to meet. These are called the tempera cake sets. They are tempera sets that are dry. So if I touch my finger to some of these paints right now, I'm not a mess because they are dried and they require water to use. So what I want to do is I'm going to show you how these work by grabbing my round brush. We've got a container of water over here. I don't know if you can see that. A couple things you need to know about the water container. When we are rinsing our brush or getting our brush, one of the things we never do is tap. This always gets paint on other people's projects and makes some folks around you uncomfortable. So just be aware, we never tap. Some options are we can either just gently swipe the brush. This makes no noise, notice that. Swipe the can, swipe the brush on the edge of the can, or we can always just wait till it stops dripping before going to the paint set. And then we're going to give this a little swirl here to sort of activate. Can you see how that water that was on my brush is now turning to paint? And then I just want to show you a little bit about the round brush. See that nice mark that the round brush makes? It's quite great. Anyways, I'm going to rinse that in there. My bristles are down at the bottom of the can when I'm rinsing, and I'm scrubbing the bristles at the bottom of the can to get that to be clean. Next type of paint is sort of the cousin of the tempera sets because it has the same name, and that is tempera paint. It comes in a bottle, and I've squeezed a little bit of blue out for myself, and this requires no water. And in fact, if you use water with this paint, it gets a little too runny. So let me pick a little bit up on my brush here, see if I can make some marks for you. So this is called just tempera paint. It comes in a bottle, and it's a little bit smooth and enjoyable. This is great paint for mixing. If we ever get to do a project this year that involves mixing paints, this is the type that we would use. Okay. I'm going to once again rinse this brush. My bristles are going to go to the bottom of the can. I'm going to do a little bit of scrubbing down there at the bottom. I'm going to come up here and quietly swipe on the edge of the can to get that clean. Last little bit of paint that I want to show you is a set that may look familiar. You may have seen a set like this at some point in your life. It's a great paint set. It's called a watercolor paint set, and that's when we get that really soft brush out that I was talking about earlier. Always, always, we need a wet brush to make watercolor paints work, and they're dry like the Tempur cakes initially. So if I touch these, you'll notice that my finger's not wet, but if I get the paint set going by adding a little water to it, do a little wiggle there in the paint set, I am ready to paint. Watercolor paints are great because they're a little bit thinner, less powerful, and they leave behind kind of a nice little soft mark that we will use sometimes in our projects. Notice how the watercolor brush, one of my favorite things about it is that it sort of the softness of the brush will all come to a point, and if I want to just make a tiny little line with that point, I'm able to, but if I want to lay that brush down and get a nice big wide stroke, I'm able to do all of those things. So the watercolor brush is quite nice. Last little thing I wanted to show you about painting in the art room is how in the world do we clean up these brushes? I know I showed you how to rinse them, but sometimes that's not quite good enough. You may have noticed that my large round brush, see how it's got a little bit of orange paint left there? That happens sometimes. So I want to make sure that all of these brushes get very clean, and fortunately for you, that happens behind the scenes with Mr. Bowlby. Often in the art room, I will put out a soapy mug. This one's one of my favorites. It says, "You only live once." I've got several of these large mugs that I will fill with soap for you. And believe it or not, boys and girls, check this out. Look how hard, look how hard, look how hard this is. All you've got to do to help me help you is to get your brush bristles down into the soap. What I've learned as an art teacher is if they hang out in here for just a little bit, maybe you're gone, maybe you're back to math class or English class, and then I can take time to sort of rinse them better at the sink. So I don't involve you with that. What I need from you is to put your bristles down in the mug, and I will handle that later. Boys and girls, I can't wait for our first painting project. I'm so glad I was able to show you some things today, like our 3 different paint sets, the Tempur cakes, paint that comes from the bottle called just regular Tempur paint, and the watercolor paints. Last but not least, I am so thankful that you will now know the back part of the brush that we hold is called the handle. The metal part holding the bristles together is called the ferrule. The ferrule is the metal part. And of course, we all know that at the end, the part that does the work and holds the paint is called the bristles. Do me a favor. Raise your hand in the classroom. No, raise both hands in the classroom if you are excited for our first painting project. Show me your excitement.